Good evening and welcome to our GEG Melbourne Spark webinar. It is great to have everybody here tonight watching, or maybe perhaps you might be watching on demand at a later time. Tonight's webinar will be all about technology to support assessment as of and for learning. And we know that most of us in schools are now just coming up to finishing up with our reports. But as good teachers, we are always definitely looking at ways that we can continue assessment during the process of the school year. So my name is Anthony and I'm the ICT and learning teacher at a primary school in Melbourne. I'm a Google certified teacher and innovator. And I'd like to introduce to my fellow co-host, Kelly Moore.
Thanks, Anthony. Yes, welcome everybody to the webinar. We're really excited getting the GEG community up and going. So thanks for joining us, and we hope that you're able to get out of tonight some tips and tricks that you can take back for the rest of the year. So as Anthony said, my name is Kelly Moore and I work in primary schools to help teachers build capacity using technology in the classroom. So I do some consulting work, but I also do work in a school helping them with that, building their ICT up in their school. I'm also a Google certified trainer, and I'm actually hoping to get into the new innovator cohort for Sydney. So I'm going to do my application, which is due on Monday. So it's a little bit scary because you just never know how it's going to go when they don't take it that many people. So yeah, so back to you, Anthony.
Great, thanks, Kelly. Now let's have a look at the rest of us. I'll throw it over to Mr. Christopher Harte. Good evening.
Good evening, Mr. Anthony Speranza and team. Delighted to be here with you guys tonight. My name is Chris, and I am a learning designer. So I was teaching for 15 years in French, Spanish, and technology. And I now do some work as Unstuck Learning Design on inquiry-based learning, really great questioning, and a lot for Google for Education. And I'm a Google certified innovator from the 2013 cohort in Sydney, and looking forward to sharing with you guys tonight.
Awesome, thanks, Chris. Kristy, good evening.
Hello, everyone. I'm Kristy Corser. I'm currently an ICT coach at a P12 college in Queensland. So although we don't currently have access to G Suite applications, or not yet, I'm happy to share some assessment stuff that we can use without having to be part of the Google Suite. As well as ICT coach, I'm also acting deputy for the early phase, and also currently doing my PhD research looking at cloud-based platforms in the primary school classroom. So excited to be here tonight.
Awesome, thanks, Kristy. You were definitely our interstate intruder, but it's great to have you here. Good evening, Aimee.
Hello, everyone. Oh. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, sorry. Hi, my name's Aimee. I work as the digital implementation specialist at a school in Victoria. I'm currently in Wellington, New Zealand for FlipCon New Zealand, which starts tomorrow. A big part of my role is doing flipped learning and flipped education with teachers at my school, and that's partly why I'm over here in New Zealand at the moment, and I'm looking forward to sharing with you about flipped feedback and how that can help with assessment. Thanks.
Awesome, thanks, Aimee. So we're going to get ourselves underway, and if anybody's watching on the live stream, feel free to ask our presenters any questions, and we have a couple of moderators that will field some of those questions. If the panel wants to jump in and ask any questions to our presenters as well, you'd be welcome to do so. So Chris, over to you.
Thank you, Anthony. Are you setting a timer for these, or are you just going to wait until you shout at me to stop?
No, I just trust that you can stick within the time frame.
Okay, good luck with that. Okay, everyone. So I am going to share my screen with you guys now. And what I would love to talk to you a little bit about is using Google Slides in particular to really promote assessment for learning. So where I'm going to start with that is actually in Google Classroom. So I'm not going to do too much on Google Classroom itself, but I am going to show you how to distribute an assignment. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the plus button in the stream. I'm going to create an assignment. And this assignment is for all of the kids in this class. So I've got this class, and I'm just going to do it for all students. I can now in Google Classroom, of course, do it for multiple students or different students and provide differentiated resources. But my assignment is called Toilet to Tap. And it's a year 7 science assignment. So I'm going to give it a due date of let's just say next week. That's actually more than that, but that's okay. And I'm going to give it a science topic. Now, what I'm going to do is from Drive, I'm going to attach the Google slide deck that I have created, which is called Toilet to Tap Assessment for Learning. I'm going to add this Google slide deck. And this Google slide deck, which I'm going to show you in a tick, is essentially a learning portfolio. So all I have to do is to give all of my assessment for learning feedback, and all of the evidence of authentic learning is going to be inside of this slide deck. So I just have to go to one place. I'm going to use Google Classroom to distribute an individual copy of each of this slide deck to every kid. So I click on this drop down here, and I say I want you to make a copy for each student. I'm then going to assign that, and that will now kick out an individual copy of this slide deck to each kid. So while that's happening, here you can see it's arrived. I can actually jump on, and I can see that Google has magically created a copy of each slide deck per learner. So I'm going to just take you to the template so I can move quickly. So this is what the slide deck looks like. It starts off with this picture, which is a bit of a provocation. And it's to get the kids to think about the big question. So just remembering that every time, everything within this slide deck is capturing learning, or the learning journey on this project, this inquiry that we're going to follow. So should we use recycled wastewater for drinking in Australia? So remember that each individual student has got their own copy of this slide deck. So they get everything, every slide, but they can edit it. So they can change the color of things. They can change the font if they really want to. They can then fill in this presentation slide. So they can actually add the name, add a photo of themselves, write a couple of sentences. And then I've got the challenge slide. So this is what the kids are being asked to do. So as you are to decide based upon your scientific understanding, underline, because that's really important, whether you think we should recycle wastewater for drinking in Melbourne. You will create a short film to convince your audience of your point of view. So the kids get the challenge, but straight up right from the start, they also get the rubric. Now, I'm a huge fan of rubrics, and this rubric in particular is the best rubric in the world, as you'll soon see. It's taxonomy, and in the short period of time I have, we're not going to talk too much about solar taxonomy, but I do recommend that you Google it. And Aimee's across in New Zealand at the moment, and actually New Zealand educators use solar taxonomy quite a lot. But essentially, it's just looking at the structure of observed learning outcomes. So if I've got a criteria, which is demonstration of scientific understanding, a pre-structural version of this, and what I might do is just quickly pop this into present mode so you can see it a little bit more clearly on your screen. So if I've got, it also allows me to use the awesome laser pointer. If I've got a student who is pre-structural in their demonstration of this scientific understanding, it would say, I do not use any science to back up my argument. Unistructural would be I refer to one scientific idea. Multistructural, I mentioned several scientific ideas. Relational, I link several scientific ideas to the challenge question to support my argument. And extended abstract, I bring in scientific ideas from other scientific topics to support my argument. Now, I am obviously, as a teacher, the font of all knowledge, but what I really want kids to do is to have some independence when they are looking at rubrics and trying to self-assess. So to help kids in their self-assessment is if a child says, right, I've referred to one scientific idea so far, they can look down into this second row here, which is called the move me on advice. And for example, if they refer to one scientific idea, they can then write a list of the main scientific ideas found in the material. So they're listing, they're moving up then to this multi-structural area. So they mentioned several scientific ideas. To move on from that, they should look down here and create a flow chart showing how each scientific idea is linked to the question. That will then help them to move up to relational. So in terms of assessment for learning, I'm really interested in what I can do as a teacher, but I also really want to encourage kids to use rubrics like this to actually help themselves to move on as well. So that's there right from the start. And actually, when I do decide to do some assessment, I can just really easily highlight this. And imagine this is Anthony Speranza's. I can highlight it and I can fill in that little block there and say, well, I think that's where you are, Anthony. So you need to look at this moving on advice and see if you can move further forward. I then set up, because remember this is a template, I then set up big concepts. So you're going to use the following slides to make notes on the big science ideas you learn about, which are important when talking about water treatment. So there's just a bit of a slide template here. And every time the kids learn a new concept, so for example, they might learn filtration. They would put filtration in here, put an explanation in, which might be Googled and copied and pasted. So then they also need to do it in their own words, potentially an example and even a diagram. And then as they learn new concepts, they just copy this slide template, this one in particular, and for each concept, they record that in their slide deck. So their notes are in the slide deck. The rubric is in the slide deck. The challenge is in the slide deck. Everything's in the slide deck. So experimental investigation, I've got, what, 2.5 minutes to go or something? Experimental investigation, so use the following slides to design your experiment. So again, the kids are going to be able to use the scientific method. They design their own experiment, they create slides, they take photos of their experiment and push the photos into here. So I'm collecting all of this evidence of learning. And obviously, because it's Google, is I can really easily click on insert a comment. It says not being able to see the word comment. There we go. And I can start giving my assessment for learning feedback here and feed forward, blah, 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 blah. And remembering that in Google, if I know who I'm going to send it to, Anthony Speranza is the man I'm going to send it to, I can use plus and Anthony's email, and that will now actually email Anthony to tell him that I've left some feedback there, which is an awesome feature within Google. He hasn't got access to it. He has now. Within Google Apps. Next bit, I want the kids to manage their learning as well. So I'm interested in looking at how well they manage learning. So I have a timeline for them. This is a 3-week project. And in the past, I've filled in the timeline. That worked okay. I left the timeline blank and tried to get the kids to decide what tasks they should do in which order. That was actually really quite difficult. And for me, the middle ground is here are the activities, and then the kids on their own timeline can say, well, I'll do activity 1 and 2 in week 1, and then I'll do activity 3, and they can just move these around and use it almost like a Gantt chart to manage the timeline of their project. And then they start, so remember they're going to do a video, so they need to do some persuasive writing. They can write their draft here. They're then able to share their slide deck to a partner who would give them some critique. Now, critique for me is the most powerful way to actually create assessment for learning. And so I've got 3 little posters here. If anybody wants them, I can always send them to them. If you are giving critique, if you're listening to critique or looking at someone's work, you should listen mindfully with your ears, eyes, open heart, and undivided attention. And if you are receiving critique, you should hold your ideas lightly, because you don't want, when you're asking for critique, you want people to help you to improve your learning. And when you give critique, you should be kind, specific, and helpful. So be kind but realistic, specific, focusing on the parts to make the whole better, and helpful, actually giving feed forward that the person can use. And that comes from an awesome book, if you're interested in assessment and assessment for learning, an awesome book called An Ethic of Excellence by Ron Berger. So just a reminder posters in there for the kids to remind them how to help each other with critique. And then here I've got a slide for the storyboard for the video. I've got another slide where I want the kids to put the script. And again, so they write their script, I can then jump on there and I can insert comments and leave some feedback and some feed forward and critique, blah, 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 in here. And then I've actually got, because it's Google Slides, I can even insert the final video. So I can go to, kids have done it on Screencastify, for example. I can insert the video, or the kids can insert the video, sorry. They can insert from YouTube, but now obviously they can insert from Drive. So if they've created some videos in Drive, they can now insert them directly into a slide deck. What I'm also really interested in, and this isn't a Google technology, but something I think I invented by accident before it became a real thing, is I used to get kids to do self-reflection videos because when I gave them reflection tasks, they always thought it was a writing task, because I'd say, right, we're going to stop now, we're going to do a written reflection. So now I can get kids to do self-reflection videos, and inserting a video using Screencastify to capture it and getting the kids to reflect. There is actually, I'm not going to show you, but it's worth having a look. There is something called Flipgrid, Flipgrid, which does a very similar job and is an awesome piece of technology. So after this webinar, not before, go and have a look at that. And finally, I can leave some teacher feedback and feed forward for kids within the slide deck as well. So using Google Classroom to push out template slide decks, which have got all of the evidence of learning that I want to capture, and allow me to leave feedback and feed forward for kids, but also they can then share it with friends and do some peer critique as well. That's it, done. Any questions, pop them in the chat. I'm happy to answer them as we go.
Awesome, thanks, Chris. There aren't any questions yet, but I was wondering if you might comment on the summative feature inside Google Classroom, so you can provide a score. And you've shown some ways where you could do more formative. Is any example you can give where you might use the score instead?
So what I think I can probably say is that that the actual summative assessment and the grids and scoring within Classroom isn't brilliant. It has a limited functionality around, you can put in a numeric score. You can give plenty of feedback and comments and things using Classroom, but the numerical score stuff is you can use it and then you can export it to a CSV file or into a Google sheet, and then put it into your package, whatever you use to collect data. But it isn't great. But what I do know is that that is actually being improved, and the gradebook integration will be coming, and that will become a much more powerful feature than it actually is at the moment.
Yeah, excellent. Couldn't agree more with what you're saying there. I much prefer to use more comments and rubrics like you've shown rather than the score itself. So thanks, Chris. If anyone has any further questions about that, feel free to drop them in. Otherwise, we're going to go now to Kristy.
All right, I'm just going to share my screen. Can you just confirm that you can see that?
No, not yet.
All right, sorry.
Yep, there we go.
Okay. Okay, so I just wanted to quickly talk about Plickers, if you haven't heard of this before. If you have, sorry to be repeating it for you, but I just think it's an awesome application that we can use in the classroom, especially if we're limited with access to devices. So as you can see from the title, it's formative assessment with one device. So what is it? It's a powerful, simple tool that lets teachers collect data at any time without the need for students to have devices. We all love technology, and it's great when we do have access to it, but when we need to think about equity, what types of devices that we've got, what students are using, what access you have in the school. With Plickers, you don't necessarily need to worry too much about what everyone's using, just as long as you've got one device. You can get it from the App Store or the Google Play Store, and it is a free application as well as web-based. So it's tailored instruction with instant feedback. So you use it for quick checks. If you're quickly wanting to get an idea about what kids are understanding when you've taught a concept, or if you've done something like flipped learning like Aimee will be talking about later, and then you just want to do a quick check to see if they've learnt what from the video what they've been doing. If you're wanting to do like a pre and post test or spelling or any type of concept that you just want to quickly check to see and gauge where kids are at in their level of ability and what they know about a topic, you can just get quick live data and then move on from there and change your pedagogy based on the data, the real life data that you're getting at that time. Plickers also talk about how you can engage all students in critical thinking. It gives them a chance to engage and participate in their learning, and perhaps without other students knowing that they're getting things right or wrong. So it allows every student to have a go without worrying about what others will think. If it's really engaging for those that are less hesitant to put their hand up and answer questions in class. So it allows you to collect information from all the students, and they don't have to know who's saying what and who's giving which answer, which I think is sometimes a beneficial thing for those that are less willing to participate in classroom discussions. So for you as a teacher, it allows you to focus more on teaching and less on the setup. So that's in regards to accessing technology. Sometimes it does take a while to get your computers going or to get students engaged with technology by the time you log on and finding the right thing. Plickers allows just the teacher to have to log on and use the application, but the students are engaged straight away, so there's no time lost. So how does it work? So as a teacher, you can set up an account at plickers.com, and from there you can create a class, you can enter the student names. Like I said before, you can also keep it anonymous. If you're showing live data and you don't want students to feel self-conscious about their results, you can keep it anonymous. You can just get an overall sight of how the class is sitting. If you don't need to know who's saying what answer, you can just keep it anonymous. But otherwise, you can create individual names. The teacher creates a quiz on the app or through the website, and then the students are given unique visual codes that look like that on the screen. And each side of the code represents an answer, A, B, C, or D. So the questions that you're putting in as the teacher need to be multiple choice of up to 4 answers. And depending on how what answer the student wants to give is depending on how they're holding that code up in front of them. And there are many different ways that teachers store these codes. You can see there that they've got one hanging off the clips, hanging up in the classroom. So the students hold their codes up just in front of their face or their body somehow to respond to the question. And the teacher scans the codes with the device. So as the teacher, you would open up the application and open up the question. And then as the students are holding up their codes, they scan across with the device, and the device collects all the answers based on the way they're holding the code. And it collects all the results in real life time. So you can have these results streaming up on the board behind you if you like, so everybody can see the results, or you can just keep it for your own record as well. So like I said before, it doesn't need a lot of equipment. So you just need one device connected to Wi-Fi or streaming your data, and you need the visual codes. And there are many different ways that teachers store the codes. Like I said before, they're hanging off the clips. You can see there that there's some stored in a bookshelf, one stuck in a book. You can laminate them. For the younger children, you can, on the back of the code, write the A, B, C, and D to make it a bit more visual if it's a bit small. I also just wanted to show you here. This is the website where you can get the cards. So it's all free to use. You get standard cards. You can purchase other cards if you're wanting different types of cards, but for the free you can get up to 40 cards and you get 2 cards per sheet. So just depending on how many students you need or if you want larger ones, but you can run this application free. And this is the library here. So as the teacher, you can manage it from the application, but it is a lot easier if you set up your quizzes through the website. So this is what your class account would look like. You can put in the questions, create the questions here, and you can see the live feed as they're answering each question. But it's really easy to manage from the application once you've got all the quiz set up in the website. So I think that was it. Any questions?
Hi, Kristy. I just was wondering, I love the storage ideas that you shared. And I was wondering if there's a limit to how many cards you can use with Plickers at once. Like, is it unlimited? Will it scan unlimited, or is there a limit on how many it can take?
Yeah, good question. I used Plickers in a parent forum that we ran for our parents, for our prep students coming in, and we probably had about 80 parents at that forum, and I could easily, if I collected 80 cards, I scanned across and collected all that data, and you could, you know, use a minimum. There'd be no minimum either, but yeah, I've used up to 80. Okay.
Awesome. And can you extract the data that you're collected in Plickers, or can you only view it within the website? Like, can you extract it to a sheet or a Excel or a CSV file, or does it just sit within their database?
That's a really good question. I haven't had a play with extracting the data, but I couldn't see why not, because it is quite user-friendly, and I'm thinking that you could probably extract it to an Excel or a Sheets, but I can't say I've done that, but that'll be something that I'd look into. That's a good question.
Mm. Yeah, it was great. Thank you for sharing it.
Thank you.
Really great tool to use, especially with like the little kids, you know.
Yeah, it's just getting them used to holding the card, and you can modify it like writing the A, B, C, and D. But yeah, it's just a practice that, like anything, once they got used to it, it's just another way of collecting data, a different way.
And can you print the codes out so that the writing is bigger around the outside, or you can
yeah, that was one of the options in the Plickers cards. You could have a larger font for younger students. Yeah, that's
great. Thank you. Are there any questions in the live chat there for Kristy?
Guys, I was just having a look. Apparently you can't export the data to a spreadsheet at the moment, but they're looking into having that as an option at some point.
Great.
Oh, that's great. Thanks for letting me know that, because I couldn't see why you shouldn't be able to. So that's really good. I'm glad they're looking into that.
They have an FAQ section as well, which is kind of worth looking at. So I might put the link for that in the chat.
Oh, thanks, Rita.
Thank you. Thanks, Kristy. Anthony, who is next?
Kelly, next up we have Aimee, who is coming from across the ditch from New Zealand.
Excellent.
Hi, everyone. I'm just going to share my screen. Okay, can you confirm you can see that?
Yep, looks great.
Great. So as I mentioned before, I'm going to be talking about flipping feedback and how you can reach every student in your class with some feedback about their assessment, about how they're going. A bit of background about me. I do teach secondary mathematics at the moment, and I've been flipping my secondary mathematics classes for a number of years. What that means, if you haven't heard of the flipped classroom before, what it means in a one-sentence nutshell is that my students watch videos at home the night before a class as an introduction to a topic and the content that we're going to cover, and then they have the entire 80-minute class period the next day for them to be working on mathematics, rather than spending some time listening to me talking and going through the lecture part of the class and them copying down notes. They've already done that before the class, and they come into the class and spend the whole 80 minutes with them doing the work. What I'm going to be talking about today, though, is about how I flip my feedback after an assessment. So I'm going to start with how I do it in a maths classroom, but then I'm going to give you some ideas for how it will work with other year levels and other subjects as well. So when I mark an assessment piece, I mark a student's test or an exam, usually in maths. That's how most of our assessments go. And I film a short video for each student where I comment on how they've gone with their test taking technique. So if they're underlining the key words, highlighting, showing their working, things like that. Things that they've done well, how well they're working out is set out and how legible it is, which is very important in mathematics, and areas for improvement for them. I do make a separate video which goes through some worked solutions for the entire test, so that if every student got question 8 wrong, I don't re-answer it and explain it on every individual student's test. I just make one video with all the solutions, but the feedback that I give students is related to those 4 topics that I've put on the slide there. So here's a quick example of what it looks like. So I've sped up the second half of it. I don't normally talk this fast, but you can see I'm going through and commenting and focusing on different areas and how the student has covered each section. And you're probably thinking this is really similar to one-on-one conferences, and it really is. Before I flipped my feedback, I used to give one-on-one feedback to students, but I find this is even better than one-on-one conferences that I used to do. So I can now give 28 students in a class individual feedback in just 5 minutes. So I get everyone online, they all watch their own video, 5 minutes of class time, and everyone's got their individual feedback. So it's like being in 28 different places all at once. I can talk about things in a video that you can't talk about effectively, or you can't write effectively on a test paper. One of the big things is that students can watch it again and again. My students watch their feedback videos before their next test. They watch it before an exam. And a big thing that I've found is that they get to choose when they watch it. So they can choose when they're in a receptive mood to be thinking about feedback and taking on board feedback. In the past, I would do one-on-one conferences on a Tuesday morning or whatever day, and you can't guarantee that a student will definitely be listening and fully taking on board everything that you're saying. The other thing they love is that they can pause and rewind what you've said if they misunderstand something or they're not sure, and they can go back over it again and again, which they can't do in real life. If I just do a one-on-one conference, it's done, and they'll never get that back again. They have to try and remember everything I've said. Use in other subjects, and I have done this in other years at other schools. I find it incredibly useful for drafting work and writing work. So essays or stories or things like that, where students are handing in a draft and you want to give them some feedback on that, can be really useful to help them with progression in between, not just as a summative assessment piece. You can film yourself talking about a poster and pointing out different sections. You can look at models that students have made, filming models, or products like woodworking type things that they've made that are hard to write about. And also useful for online web pages or computer coding or any kind of computer-based task that isn't on paper, that you can't easily scribble on paper for. What surprised me when I started doing this was that students were choosing to watch it multiple times and to get more and more out of it. Like I said, they use it as revision. Parents watch it with the students, and parents give me amazing feedback, and they say things like, oh, you're giving so much feedback and we're so impressed and we can't believe how much feedback you're giving. I'm giving the same amount of feedback as I always gave, but the parents can now see the feedback I'm giving them and help their children to understand it. Student results increased dramatically, and I could really see students were taking on board the feedback I was giving them. And students keep requesting more and more videos. Can you make us a video on this test, on this assessment, so we can watch it again and again? Just want to quickly cover the technology that I use to film it. So I always get questions about this. So this is a document camera that I filmed that example that I showed you. It's an IPEVO Ziggy HD+, which I can provide a link for if people are interested in. So you can see the camera's just up here, and it just sits up above, and you put your work down here. So you could use it for a model or anything. Or you could just, if you didn't want to buy one of these, you can just set yourself up with a retort stand or a bookshelf and put an iPhone up high and film yourself talking about student work. I upload my work to YouTube, but I make sure I put it as unlisted, so that, because obviously it's private to that student only, and I just tell them that they have the link. I put the link up on the class, on the student feedback when I give them their test result in the comments section. I put the link there, and I just say to them, you have the link, you have the power to do whatever you want with the link. So if they want to show it to all their friends, that's up to them. And unlisted on YouTube means only people with the link can view it. And when you do upload a YouTube video, just make sure it is ticked as unlisted here. And this is the kind of link you get. So someone could accidentally guess that link, but they're all completely random, and there's not much chance that that would happen. I think that's my 7 minutes up.
Awesome. Thanks, Aimee. I have a question, but before I do ask that question, I really like that idea of giving the power to the kids, because if you give them that unlisted link, really it's up to them. You know, they have to understand that if they share that on, then it will be visible by other people. So that's really, really good. I'm just wondering if you've worked with other colleagues on this particular method, and I guess I'm wondering about colleagues that might look at this and say that's a little bit daunting. What sort of advice would you give? Is there a way that you can start simple? And how have you worked with other colleagues in encouraging to take this this approach?
Yeah, definitely. So it can be quite easy, and you can see in the example I gave, I use actual paper. So we've had a lot of success with English teachers using the handwritten paper and just filming directly onto that, and just encouraging people to think about it's just like you're talking to the student one-on-one. A lot of people think it takes a lot of extra time, but I just do mine as I'm marking, and I'm having a conversation with the student as I'm marking, and it really doesn't take any extra time than the normal marking would take. I'd encourage people, and I do encourage people who are just getting started, to just start small. Just start with one assessment task. You don't have to flip feedback for absolutely everything, but have a go at it and see how your students react to it, because it can be really powerful.
Yeah, great. And essentially, if anything, really, you're saving time and you're increasing your effectiveness, because you still have to spend that time assessing the work anyway. But if you can record it while you're doing it, it means that you've got an archive of that, and the kids can look at it again and again if they want to, and in a more receptive way, as you say. So thanks for sharing that, Aimee. Any other questions from anyone else?
Anthony, can I just jump in for a take?
Please do.
Just an idea that a guy called Chris McNamara, who works for Parramatta Diocese up in Sydney, he was telling me that if you're using Google Classroom and you use the Google Classroom app on your mobile device, he records that video feedback, even if it's actually a conversation with the kid sitting at their desk, or he records that video feedback using his mobile device, and then sends it as an announcement directly to that individual child through Classroom. So it's a very similar process to Aimee, and a really powerful way of giving that video feedback and using the Google Classroom app.
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, well, if there aren't any more questions, Kelly, I believe it's your turn.
Thanks, Anthony. Great presentation, Aimee. Thank you for that. Okay, so I am going to share my screen. Okay, can you see that?
Yep.
Awesome. Okay, so a group of teachers that I've been working with, we've developed an assessment task where the students were learning about cities and countries in the southern hemisphere, but specifically the southern area of Africa and the southern area of South America. And we used MyMaps to, one, introduce the students to MyMaps and how they work, and two, to use it as an assessment. So first of all, we started by introducing them to MyMaps, and what we got them to do is actually, without even using any of the other tools that are up here in the search bar area, we just got them to investigate and have a look around the map. So they actually went into different parts, and we talked about where the equator was and where we wanted them to have a look. But in this case, we actually let them choose anywhere in the southern hemisphere in which they wanted to investigate. And we got them to pick a place by just zooming into a place and finding somewhere that they wanted and pinpointing it, rather than getting them to try and find locations. And this meant that they came up with quite obscure places in different countries within Africa. And that meant that we got quite a good response from them, and it wasn't the sort of most popular places that they might find by just Googling on the internet. So then they actually use this to learn and teach themselves how to use the map. So we didn't show them how to do anything on here, but all we do is get them to put their name in and the country. Some kids did take it a little bit further and put some information in. Really great to see. So MyMaps is a great tool to use for this. I'm just trying to find one that has some information in it. I can't see one at the moment. So yeah, so this was just a great little instruction for them. Then what we got them to do from here, actually developed, we want them to collect some data. So we developed with the students a form in which they would fill out to get information about a place that they wanted to find out about. So they had to put in, well, we collected their email addresses, but so we knew whose was what, but we had to get them to put their location, state, territory, but this also was sometimes country. We got them to say 2 features of the place and why the place is special, the climate, vegetation, and a native animal. And then we actually collected their responses in a spreadsheet. And we then, and I've just taken out some of the identification information. Then we just imported it into the map. So we went down to, I go down to the next layer. We added another layer, so it wouldn't be this layer. And so this one here's the one that they added, but I've just replicated it here. So you can see here, these are the countries that, and we could actually tell here if students actually understood where the Southern Hemisphere was, because some students clearly didn't from up there. But when we actually click on here, it actually imported all the information that they had to collect. So this actually then told the teachers what the student found out, what their research skills were like, what they found out, what they know about the place. Some students we found copied and pasted information, which was a great lesson within itself. And other students, you know, they were really able to abstract the most important information that they needed. So if you don't know how to use MyMaps, it's a fantastic little tool, and I know Chris Harte's favourite tool. So I hope I don't stuff this up. But basically you create your map and you create your form, and I have created just a short form here. And then when you have your form, you can get some answers in your form, and I've just done some dummy answers there. And so then when we have our map, we can actually import that form. Use import. Hopefully this won't take too long. Yep, okay, so we go import from Google Drive. And you can collect data from a whole heap of different websites, and I'm sure Chris will share some of those with you because I've used some of them before. But Google have a whole research and tables space in which you can collect a whole heap of data from that's, you know, current and happening, so you can use real live data of what's happening around the world. But this is for the purpose of the assessment, so we just need to put in where the location is so it knows where it's going to put the information, and we want the title of the location to be the actual name of the place. And I've only done 3 examples here, so it shouldn't take too long to come in. And here it comes. So just loading. So I know this is going to work because it's loading, otherwise it'll come up with an error. So sometimes if you don't put the right information in the right spots, it will come up with an error. And I can see now in 30 seconds, maybe 10, 20 seconds. Anthony, I hope I haven't run out of time yet. So you can see here that now when I click on those areas that I've actually collected the information, there's the information that was in my actual spreadsheet. So it was just a great little assessment task just to see how the students were going with their learning, and we could then check in and do some more work with them if we needed to, or we could use this as a summative assessment, so we could say, well, this was the end assessment of the unit, or we could use it to inform us and then move forward into another part of the learning. So once you do create a form and students are inputting data, the map will just populate from, if it's linked to the actual, if it's linked to the spreadsheet, it's going to populate any data that's in there. So if you say just import the actual spreadsheet with just one piece of information in there, then another 5 children come along and add their information, it will just populate as that information comes in. I don't think there's too much of a time delay in that. So that was just what we've been doing this term and working on this term. So yeah, so that's it, really.
That's great, Kelly. I absolutely love Google MyMaps. I've used it quite a lot with my students at all levels, and yeah, it's such a great tool, and as you say, for assessment as well. So well done.
Yeah, it's really good.
Yeah, the kids absolutely love to make the connections, and as you said, if you can add that extra layer of using spreadsheets, it's really fantastic. Yeah, we sort of bring it into more and more inquiries, regardless what they're about, really, these days. So.
And Rita, you've used it with younger kids, haven't you? Like lower.
In fact, it's funny, we just had planning this week, and we used it. I used it last year with 1-2s, and we're going to use it again this term because, you know, the teachers are already saying, oh yeah, the 2s will remember how to use it from last year. And yeah, they're just making connections to like last year's places that they felt connected to was their inquiry. But this next term, actually, we're doing a French bilingual program actually at the school at the moment, so they'll be making connections to France and the French speaking. You know, it's very easy to bring into that. So
it's great, you know, that you've been able to use it with such a younger such younger students. I've used it with 3-4s. I haven't used it with students younger than that, so it's good to know that it's something that can be tried.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. That was about it. Anthony, are we going back to you?
Okay, well, I think I'll go next. Can you see my screen there?
Yep.
Awesome.
Can we?
Okay, so I'm going to be talking about a little bit of work that my colleagues and literally the awesome team I work with at my school, about some work we're doing with assessing and tracking the critical and creative thinking capability. So specifically, I'm going to show how we're using docs, forms, and sheets in that process. So I want to set a little bit of context around this. So our school's been invited to participate in a cluster, and we're investigating how we can develop and assess particular capabilities and dispositions in STEM with a focus of transformative and deep student learning. Our school has decided to focus on unpacking the critical and creative thinking capability from the Victorian curriculum. So if there's anyone playing from the rest of Australia, it's essentially very, very similar to the what you find for the critical and creative strand in the general capability in the Australian curriculum. And essentially what we're doing is we're undertaking some action research at the moment. So in term 2, we've been trialling a few things, and our aim is to plan an inquiry STEM unit for term 3, and particularly try to really focus on how do we build the capability within our students and observe how and what they do, be, and say in moments of creativity. So there were a couple of questions naturally that were asked of us. Essentially, what is creativity? I think it's a bit of an aerosol word that gets thrown around a little bit. It's really hard to define. We sort of agreed that if you can know and understand the concept of creativity, then you can and should teach it. But how does one effectively teach with kids the creativity? And I guess what we're looking at this term and next term is how we then will assess and track the development of these dispositions in students. So this is a table from Bill Lucas, who did a webinar for the VCAA last year. And this was what he would recommend approaches to assessing the capabilities, because when it comes to assessing capabilities and dispositions, it's a far different ballgame than assessing maths or assessing literacy or outcomes or things like that. So it's very hard to do. But here are the ways that he would suggest that it looks like in terms of student, teacher, real world, and online. The 3 that we decided to focus on was looking at how we could use some of our tools to allow kids to self-reflect, capture diaries or journals over a longer period of time, and also capture performance tasks or give opportunities for performance tasks so that we could really see what kids are doing, saying, and being. So this was a couple of weeks ago. We had an opportunity where our year 6s went on camp. And so with our year 5s, we literally shelved the whole timetable and we made like this creative and critical thinking project. And it went for quite a long period of time. So we weren't stuck for our usual timetable. And our students have been investigating the Lord Howe Island stick insects, which are an endangered species. And as a build-up in part of their inquiry, we've framed a problem in saying that we wanted them to create a solution to get some seeds onto the island. And so looking at it from the perspective of scientists and looking at the makeup of the island in Google Earth, you could see that it's almost impossible to dock a boat onto Lord Howe Island. So we wanted them to create a catapult in order to send the seeds over into Lord Howe Island. So they were presented with this problem and they had to solve that with certain constraints. So they had to build and justify a working prototype of their catapult design. And they had to use using paddle pop sticks, elastic bands, blue tack or Play-Doh. And they were only allowed to use certain quantities of those, and certain quantities equaled certain weights, and they had to be under a particular weight for the boat. And they had to fling a paperclip 5 meters, and that would be the equivalent that we were saying that of catapulting something 40 meters onto Lord Howe Island. Now we did this process over 6 to 8 hours over 4 days, and there were opportunities for collaborative and individual tasks. And without going into too much detail, the process was for kids to investigate, plan, design, build, redesign and act upon that initial design, and then reflect after the fact. So one of the things that we did on the very first day was to send out a Google form, and we wanted 2 simple questions from the kids to answer. To me, creativity is ... And then as well as that, ways I was creative today. So this was on the very first day. And what we did was we gave the kids 5 minutes at the end of each day across 4 days, every single day, to ask themselves the same questions, because we wanted to see if going really deep into this approach of problem solving and critical and creative thinking, are we actually shifting them in the way that we want them to shift? The very last day we did it, I think we missed the Thursday, but on the Friday we asked ways that they were creative, but we also asked if their understanding of creativity had changed that week. So naturally, as you collect your results in Google Forms, you can see all sorts of evidence of ways kids are thinking. And what surprised us was certain things like, okay, well, they've got coming up with new ideas, or creativity is fun, exciting, and useful is a really good word. But during the week, there were kids who were saying things like, to me, creativity is art and drawing and color, which to some extent, they're kind of right, but it's not what we wanted them to be thinking creativity was. And so I guess that's created a bit of conversation in that year level in terms of what kids' perceptions are around creativity beyond the visual arts and being colourful, I guess. And so certainly asking the question, ways I was creative today, gave the kids opportunity to say, well, you know, the catapult task did allow me to be creative, or some kids were still saying, I don't know, and they weren't picking onto the fact that what they were doing was creative, so they were writing that they weren't creative. All of this data then feed into a Google Sheet. So you can see the Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Friday data. And then using a VLOOKUP, how this formula works is it checks this email address here and finds it in each of those sheets and then puts their data across here. So we're using this in our action research to target particular genders and year levels and specific kids to see how their thinking has progressed over the week. So one of the other things that we're doing is using a continuum or a rubric with particular skills and dispositions related to creativity and critical thinking. So for example, one of those is the ability to adapt. And so we described what that would look like and maybe what that would not look like if you were struggling, specific to the prototyping design task of the catapult, and asking kids to rate themselves where they were on that scale. We used a Google form. So what they did was they simply plot themselves in that form from 1 to 4 where they were for each of those particular skills and dispositions. And we also asked them to record down what they thought was a strength of theirs, an opportunity for them to grow in. Now, using an add-on called Autocrat, what we did was turn this back to the student. So once they completed the form, the Autocrat add-on lets you then synchronize that data with a template that you set up in Google Docs. And then when the students get this back, they will see their number that they indicated on the form inside their document. And the second half of that document looks like this. If they filled in the form and they said this was their response to what they thought the strength was, then they've got that captured in a document. Of course, the benefit is collecting this sort of data in a form as teachers, we can then see, okay, let's see how many kids rank themselves for inquisitiveness or originality. And then we can also, again, track, because this is an action research project, in seeing how some kids are thinking along the lines. And of course, being in sheets, then we can also filter and sort some of that data as well. That's about it in a nutshell. Any questions about any of that?
I love the use of Autocrat there, Anthony. I haven't used it in that way before. Have you usually used it to send out certificates or something like that after professional learning to teachers? So that was really another how it can be used to empower students.
Yeah, we use it quite often in that example there, where we want them to complete a form, but we want their information to go back to them. We know in forms we can do, you know, send me a copy of my responses, but if we want that in a document where they can continue to add ideas over time, it's quite useful. But then you also get the value out of the form being able to capture all that data for yourself as a teacher as well.
Anthony, would you and your school be happy to share your continuum?
Yeah, absolutely. So
Fantastic.
That continuum is actually one we started developing as part of our Genie Sale project, and it's quite general. So we modified that particular continuum specifically for this particular project that we're doing. So it was more related to the particular tasks that they had to do as part of that design brief. But we are looking at developing a new one for term 3 as part of this action research. I'm happy for anyone to reach out to me and clarify that further.
Yeah. Yeah, it was great. I think the critical thinking is becoming such a big part of, you know, education. I wonder what teachers would say if you sent out that form to them about how they were creative today.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's definitely part of their understanding all about this particular capability. Like, I know the colleagues I've been working with have gone full 360. Like, we thought we knew how to get kids to be creative and what creativity was, and now we're like back at star one, and like we're not really doing this justice at all if you really start to unpack that capability and see precisely what it's all about. And even after the fact that we've gone through that particular process and kids are still saying, I don't know what creativity is, it's informing our practice as well, that we ultimately need to be more explicit and deliberate. And, you know, we're thinking about moving towards language more around skill set, mindset, tool set, or what do we want kids to know, be, and do? Because I think ultimately at some point you have to be more directive with kids. You can't just expect them, whilst you can create conditions for creativity, they really need to be scaffolded through that process, I think.
Yeah.
Anthony, well done. It's great to see you leading the way in you know, assessment around the capabilities as well, because it's, you know, I guess it's maybe not a totally new area, but certainly with the label capabilities it is, and I wonder how other schools are going around assessing for that. So yeah, well done.
Yeah, thank you. And I'd like to say even all the presentations tonight have been really interesting. Like, it's great we haven't had anything like, when you think of assessment, it's really dry and boring, but everyone's shown different ways of what that assessment looks like. So having said that, before we wrap up, Rani Fernandez in the chat did ask what year level that was. And those students are in 5-6 that we're working with. But we're looking at next year how we approach the capabilities, and we unpack that for each of the year levels, and you know, certain language that we can use with foundation in year 1 and 2. But we certainly think by the time they get up into 5-6 that they should be really au fait with language like skill set, mindset, and tool set. So would like to thank everybody for tuning in, and I'd certainly like to thank all of the presenters that generously gave up their time, Kelly and Rita for moderating as well. And we certainly hope that you have enjoyed this webinar, and please stay tuned for future GEG Melbourne webinar events as well. But for now, it's goodbye, and everybody say goodbye.
Bye.
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 Thank you. Bye.
Bye.